Hello, everyone. Just waiting to make sure that people can hear me and for people to arrive. So today's stream is not going to be casting the tournament that's going on, the Bimap tournament on Arabian Arena. Today's going to be a tutorial on how to use Advanced Genie Editor, specifically for AI scripters. And so I think the tutorial might show a few more advanced tips, but it's going to kind of be focused on the basics. It won't be a full modding tutorial, but just the kind of things that AI scripters will want to be able to look up if they're scripting AIs. So the Advanced Genie Editor is the main tool that people will use to create mods for the game, but it's also the tool that can look up the data files for most things that are used in the game, especially for units and technologies. Those are going to be things that are important for AI scripters. The Advanced Genie Editor was started back like 15 or so years ago, and was one of the first like widestream modding tools. I think there are a few others that were out a bit earlier than that. I think Genie was one of those, but the Advanced Genie Editor was one that was much more fully featured and was successful since then. That was what the Forgotten Empires mod was based off of, and then that was carried on into a DE. And DE actually includes the Advanced Genie Editor in the installation files. You might find Google links to the Advanced Genie Editor that's on the Age of Kings Heaven Blacksmith website. That version of Advanced Genie Editor is out of date and won't load the definitive edition files properly. So if you're like me, you might have this AI directory for your DE folder. You might have this kind of saved in your file paths. So the Advanced Genie Editor is actually located in the files. If you go to the DE folder itself, and then under tools_builds, and then Advanced Genie Editor 3. And so when you see it, it'll open up like this for the first time. And this is a screen which asks you which files you want it to read. And usually what you can do is just click on this Advanced Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition button, and that will fill in all of these paths. Let me just change it to something else. Like the Conquerors, for example. These were the original file paths. If you click on this, that'll fill in all of the file paths that you need. The only other time that you would probably change these is if you're working on your own mod, and if so, you would change this file path to the dat file to be somewhere in your mods folder. The recent paths will save the recent file paths that you've used for the dat file. You can see that I've used this one for mods that I've made. So once you've picked all the file paths, the most important one is the dat file. The language files will be what's used to show the unit and technology names. So just make sure these are all correct and hit open. And so by default, Advanced Genie Editor will open up to the Units tab. So just to show a few of the things on the interface. First, I think the first time you open up the Advanced Genie Editor, it'll have the show graphics and show icons open by default. I usually like to uncheck these, as you can see here. So making sure that these are unchecked. Otherwise, you'll have additional windows open, and it'll try to load an icon here, but it won't work because DE stores the icons differently. So just have these turned off. So I don't use a lot of the options here on the top. One nice feature is that this triple plus icon allows you to open up a second window. And so I'll just choose the default file paths again. So if you want to have two different windows open to be able to compare between like two different units at once, you can have two windows open simultaneously. That can be useful in certain situations. If you need to open up a new like open up the .dat file again, you can just hit open and it'll open up this window again. Yeah, I'm glad to see you here, Mr. Elephant. So all the other features on here I don't use very much. So then next in the UI, you have a whole bunch of different tabs here, which is what brings you to different parts of the data file. The ones that I'm going to show today are the Units tab, which is what you'll use most often, the Text tab, the Effects tab, and then we'll briefly touch on the Graphics and Terrains tab. The other tabs are ones that you probably won't use very much for AI scripting, and I'm trying to keep this concise as much as I can. I'm the kind of person that likes to get into the weeds, but I'm going to try to keep things fairly on the surface. It can be a bit cluttered with user interface, but it's the kind of thing that you can kind of dig into more and more as you spend more time with it. All right, so what's next here? So let's take a look at the Units tab first. The first thing is that you have this drop down here to pick the syllabization. And this usually only matters for graphics, like building graphics are different from civilization to civilization. But in most cases, differences in unit stats between the different civilizations are actually handled by technologies in the text and effects tabs. So it doesn't really matter most of the time which civilization you have selected. And then here is where you can do a search for particular kinds of units. For example, if I wanted to search for Archer, you can see that this list of all the unit IDs filters to only show ones that have Archer in the name. So it brings up Archer ranges and various other units. One thing you'll notice is that the number here exactly corresponds to unit IDs that you might be familiar with. So unit ID 4 is Archer, for example. And so if you're trying to look up, okay, what's the unit ID for a particular unit, that this is the number that you're looking for. You can do defconst for Archer 4, and that will allow you to have that unit defined. Of course, Archer is defined automatically by the game, but sometimes you might need to look this up to figure out a particular unit ID. And if you're wondering how I figured out what the unit IDs are to put it in the AI reference table for objects, for example, if we go to this table, I think a lot of you would probably go to this page to look up the different IDs for various units. And let me post a link here in the chat to the AI reference for those who might actually be seeing this AI reference for the first time. We might have some people visiting who are not familiar with this website. Yeah, so you can go to the AI reference website and then under objects table, that will bring you to this list of all the unit IDs. And if you're curious how I got all these numbers and get them every time a new DLC or patch is released, it shows them right here. And also in the Advanced Genie Editor, you'll always be able to see the IDs of every DLC, even if you haven't purchased them. So that's something that's nice. You just can't play with that those units, obviously, if you don't own the game. All right, so going on to further things, so we have this field that can filter. This is an inclusive search. The second field is actually one that's an exclusive search. So if you want to filter out results, for example, I could type in range, and that removes all of the Archer ranges from this list. So the first one is an inclusive search, and the second one is exclusive. And then I'll get to let's see. The next thing that we can take a look at, I'm picking the order that I want to explain these. I think I'll get back to these. These are filters on different types of stats that you can do in this list. I'm going to head over to the main part of the units interface to kind of talk through various things that might be useful for AI scripters. And that will make these filters make more sense here on the left. So the first thing, we've already talked about the unit ID that's displayed here. All of the IDs are listed numerically in order from top to bottom. So the first thing is that you'll see the class for the unit here. If you're used to using classes in AI scripting, those classes will be 900 plus, so 900 to like 970, something like that. All of the classes listed in the Advanced Genie Editor take the 900 off. So instead of 900 for archery class, it's class 0. And then infantry class, cavalry archer class, for example, was 936 in AI scripting. It's just class 36 in Advanced Genie Editor. So you can find a class for the unit right here. The type, it corresponds to the object data category. So if I flip back to the AI reference and go to object data, the object data category, this object data number 3 corresponds to the type here in the Advanced Genie Editor, and it kind of just sorts them into eye candy, trees, projectiles, units, buildings, and so on. And this filter here on the left can filter out certain types of units. So example, if you only want to search for units of buildings, you can do type 70 and 80, and that removes some of the projectiles in this list. So type 70 plus, 70 is units and 80 is buildings. I'll flip this back to the default, which is everything, all the different types of units. All right, and then the next thing I want to do is to scroll down here. So we got the scroll here. It's a long list of attributes. You got the graphics here at the top. And a lot of these stats will be pretty straightforward, and you might start seeing that a lot of the object data is pulling directly from these stats. One that usually takes a bit more explanation is the attacks section. And so each unit has different types of attacks that it can do. So for example, archers have 3 attack against class 27, which is spearmen, 0 standard buildings attack, 4 base pierce attack, and then 0 against rams and trebuchets, and 0 against stone walls. So what happens is that all of these attack stats, if the unit that the archer is attacking has these corresponding armors down here in this list for the types of attacks that the archer has, then all of those attacks from the archer will be added up. For example, let's see, so we got the armors down here. Archers have base melee armor, have archer armor, base pierce armor, and this one's currently unused, but it was used when they were trying to code the latest attack, being able to pierce all types of armor. They've implemented it differently now. If we go to, for example, the spearman, the spearman has spearman armor as well as pierce armor, and these are both 0. So when the archer is attacking, I'm going to go back to the archer here. It would attack, add the 3 spearman class attack plus the 4 base pierce attack, and so the archers would have 7 total attack against spearmen. So that's how you can read these attacks fields, and then the armors likewise are true for every unit. To answer your question, Mr. Elephant, if I just take off this filter here, you can see that unit IDs are actually almost to the 2400s now. They're roughly split by DLCs. So you'll see that generally it looks like the Battle for Greece units start around 2100. We have the Three Kingdoms DLC units in the 1900s and 1800s and so on. And that list, these unit IDs keep on getting added as more units get added to the game. All right, so we've explained attacks and armor. There is this displayed attack, which I think DE might not use anymore. This used to be the first type of attack that was displayed in the UI. So if the archer had fletching research, it would be this is displayed attack +1, for example. Now I think the game reads these directly and like the base pierce attack directly, and then does the math to figure out how much total attack there is. All right, so the next one is frame delay. We'll kind of touch on this later when we look at the graphics tab, but this is used for the attack delay. The archer waits until 15 frames of its attack animation have finished before it starts actually shooting the projectile. And the other units, other stats that might not be self-explanatory is the dead unit. Once the archer has been killed and finishes falling to the ground, the game actually switches the archer out for a completely different unit ID. And unit ID number 3 is the new unit that's on the map when the corpse from the archer is kind of faded into the ground. So just knowing that once a unit dies, it switches into a completely different unit once its dying animation is finished, I think is important for some people to realize. And you can actually look for dead units with DUC. So if you want to see how many dead units are currently on the ground, you can do that. And then the last one, is switching back to Archer again, is there is something called interface kind in the Advanced Genie Editor. If you're familiar with this list that you can see with the tooltip here, this is exactly the same as the object data command ID and object data for AI scripting. So if we go over here, the object data command ID, the list here for the command ID, which you can use with UP filter exclude and UP filter include. If you wanted to look up what a unit's command ID is, you can also find it in the interface kind in the Advanced Genie Editor. And then I think the last thing we'll touch on in the units tab before we go back to the filters is the train locations. The most recent patch added the ability for units to have multiple train locations. For example, if I go to the Spearman has a train location at the barracks for its first one. It trains in 22 seconds, but it can also be trained at the donjon, which is also in 22 seconds. So this can be a way you look up which building the unit is trained at. All right, so that kind of ends up like the particular stats that I think are not self-explanatory for AI scripters. Hopefully that helped explain some things here. And so going back to the filters, let's think of an example here. Let's go back to the archer, for example. One thing you can do is these filters will give you all the different kinds of stats that are available in this part of the Advanced Genie Editor you can use as a filter. For example, we can go to class. And once you do that, you'll see that it adds a C space 0 to show that the class for the archer is 0, the class for the archer range is 3, the class for the heavy cavalry archer is 36. And you can actually use these in a search. So if I did exactly C space 0 in the search, now this shows you all units that have the class 0. Now, something to be aware of is that if you wanted to look for class 1, or let's do a different example. So I think class 1 is one that's not used very much. Let's go class 3. One thing you'll notice is that since C space 36 matches this search, then this will pull in all classes that are also in the 30s. So what you can do is just add a comma, since it's a strictly like a string search. So if you do space 3, comma, this will now show you all of the buildings that have buildings class. And so that can be pretty useful if you want to find what units have a particular class assigned to them. And another feature is that you can also use a pipe symbol, and this allows you to search for multiple search criteria. So we were looking at the interface kind before, which has splits between the normal buildings or civilian buildings and then military buildings. So the civilian buildings is 2, and military buildings is 10. So if we wanted to find all building class buildings that are also military buildings, what we could do is, so we have this first filter set to class, and then we can set the second one to interface kind. And now it adds a CA. I don't know what the CA stands for, but the CA lists the interface kind. And so we could, with this pipe symbol, we could add so CA10. And what by default, this is an OR search. So this will show either objects that are class 3 or objects that have the military building interface kind. If you wanted to do an AND search, you could select this box, and this will show objects that have both the building class and the military buildings interface kind. So this will show you all of the ones that fall under those categories. And if you wanted to figure out what buildings have interface kind but not building class, so again, this second box here is an exclusive search. If you wanted to filter out class 3 objects, that shows you all military buildings that are not building class. So you get all the towers and walls. So you can see that having these kind of filters can give you an insight about what kind of units would be found in a DEC search with the various filters that you have set up. So yeah, you have to review, you have the pipe, you have the inclusive search and the exclusive search. And then a pipe allows you to add multiple search criteria. And if the AND box is unchecked, that will mean that anything that matches the multiple criteria here will show up in the list. And if the AND is checked, it's ones that fulfill all of these criteria in the search. So I think these features with being able to search is probably what is the biggest advantage for being able to use Advanced Genie Editor for AI scripting. I'm just looking to see if there's anything else in my notes that I wanted to touch on. I think that's it. If anyone has questions as I'm going through these things, please post the questions, and I'll feel more than free to answer them in the comments or on stream here. I think the pipe, using the pipe search and these filters, and also using the AND checkboxes are some things that casual users of the Advanced Genie Editor don't really know about. So I think this can be really useful for people to know. I think with that, unless there's questions that pop up, I think we'll go on to the text tab. And so just like the units tab, the tech IDs are listed on the left here for all technologies. And you might be wondering, how are there 1,200 technologies in the game? Well, pretty much like this, of course, lists all of the buttons you can click. But also pretty much all civilization bonuses are also technologies. They're just researched for free immediately at the beginning of the game or when a particular age is reached. So we've got the ID here on the left. And we've also got a research time. So you can see how long a technology takes. For example, if I choose Town Watch, it takes 25 seconds and it's researched at the town center. And button ID means that if the top row is 1 through 5, the middle row is 6 through 10. This means that Town Watch uses the middle slot on the second row. And then required texts here are at the top. You have these are all the technologies that are required text before the Town Watch can be researched. So the feudal age has to finish before it becomes available. And you also have this minimum required technologies. So at least one of the technologies up here has to be researched. And so this forces feudal age to be researched first. Let's take a look at some other examples. So we got the Pikeman upgrade. Something that was new in the recent update is that Pikeman can now be researched from donjons. So you can see that there's 2 different entries for research locations down here. And you also might see that in the required technologies, there's 3 listed but players only have to have 2 of these technologies to be researched first. So they can either have researched Castle Age. The Spearman has to have been made available, which is usually something that happens in Feudal Age unless you're Armenians. And also if you have met the pikeman requirement. So if we take a look at this pikeman requirement technology, we can type in 955. So this is specific to Armenians. And so for Armenians, it meets the pikeman requirement if the player is in Feudal Age and the Spearman is made available. So this kind of allows the Armenian player to research pikemen in Feudal Age because both of these have been met, so that makes pikemen available. And some of you will notice as well, like the Spearman being made available, if we take a look at that. Most units are not unlocked at the beginning of the game, as you might have observed. So to make the Spearman available, either there's one required technology, so one of these 2 has to be met. The player has to either be in the Feudal Age, or the player has to have the civilization bonus for early barracks technologies, which is something that is unique to the Armenians, if we take a search here for that technology. And so that kind of shows the different things in the technologies that you might want to be aware of. The next tab we want to look at is the Effects tab. And the Text tab and the Effects tab are very important. They link to each other. So if you take a look at Scale Barding, what you'll notice is that Scale Barding has Effect 81. So on its own, the Technologies tab just gives the details for the technology, but doesn't tell you what the technology actually does. And so what it does, it assigns its technology to Effect 81. So if we go over to the Effects tab and then search for 81, this is where you actually see the effects that the technology has. So there's 9 different effects. It changes the armor type 4 by 1 for class 12. And that sounds like a lot of gibberish. You can kind of take a look over here, and it kind of spells it out a bit more. So class 12, which is cavalry, are given +1 base melee armor. And then you can look at this next one, it's +1 pierce armor. And then same thing for the scout class. And same thing for the missionary. Now you also see that it actually subtracts 1 melee armor from the melee Ratha. And this is because if you go over to the Units tab, the Ratha melee is cavalry class, but Ratha melee armor is actually improved by the archer range armor, the archer armor upgrades. So like padded archer armor, leather archer armor, and so on. And so since this first effect gives +1 armor to cavalry class, the Ratha melee units have to have 1 subtracted off of their armor. It's just some interesting quirks of like how the game implements these technologies. One really nice feature is that there's a field up here which allows you to actually search what technologies affect particular units or classes. For example, if we wanted to take a look at the Ratha melee, 1738 is its unit ID. What we can do is search in here, and this shows you any place where 1738 shows up in an effect description. So this it can be a useful way to show which technologies affect a particular unit. So we already saw the armor technologies reducing armor to offset the cav armor upgrades. You can see over here, you can kind of see what the technology is. So the benefiting by fletching, bodkin arrow. So this can be a useful way to look up various units. One thing to note is that A lot of the technologies in the game are implemented by classes rather than exact unit IDs, which just kind of makes the effects a lot simpler for the devs to code up. And then a couple other things to note is that this is where the tech trees are located. So this is what actually, for example, for the Hindustanis, this is where the heavy demo ship, fast fire ship, shipwright, dry dock, heated shot, this is where all of the technologies that are not available to particular civilization are set. Sometimes you'll see civ bonuses added in the tech tree slot here under effects. And then also the team bonuses are here as well. And so that's the effects tab. I think that we're going to briefly touch on two more tabs here. So we got the graphics tab. And the main reason I'm showing this is to, if we go back to the Archer, and we go back up to frame delay, I said earlier that the frame delay is the number of frames in the attack animation that have to finish before the unit shoots their projectile. And so this is actually this is used in the calculation of attack delay. So 15 frames are you have to go by. And the key here is that if you look for the Archer's attack graphic, 627, this is what is tied to the graphics tab. So you can search for 627 in the graphics tab. And this will give you the stats for the Archer's attack animation. So it shows you that 30 frames per angle that the Archer is facing. And so if the frame delay is 15 out of 30 total frames, that means halfway through the attack animation is when the arrow gets launched. And since the animation duration is 0.7 seconds, that means that the attack delay for an Archer is 0.35 seconds. So I can kind of show you how the attack delay is calculated by the game. In the most recent patch, we did get an object data for object data attack delay that calculates this for us automatically. So you might not actually have to go into this graphics tab and calculate it by hand, thankfully. But this kind of shows you stuff under the hood of like how it's actually figured out by the game. Other stuff with the graphics, you're not really going to be using much at all as AI scripters. And then lastly, terrains. This is all of the terrains that are in the game, which is quite a lot. The only use I've really found for these terrains is with the commands up get point terrain and up point terrain, which checks what terrain that tile has. And that can be useful if you're trying to figure out if a tree is a straggler tree or if it's actually a forest tree. And so if the terrain that the game gets is one of these forest terrains, I can do a search here. So there's about, looks like it doesn't have a results, like a list of number of results that you can, of how many it found, unfortunately. All right, so we got selection. So there's about 24. I don't think this is a forest terrain, but so 23 forest terrains. So if the terrain on that tile is one of these forest terrains, then you know that it's a forest tree rather than a straggler tree. So that can be useful. But that's a lot of terrains they have to check against. So whether it's worth it or not is up to you. But what this tab really does is it says, okay, on this tile, what are there any objects that are automatically placed on this tile when the terrain is generated? So for the oak forest, it generates oak forest on every tile that the forest is, that is called oak forest terrain. And then for the baobab trees, the baobab forest, it places baobab trees with a less density. So if you're wondering why the baobab forests are not a tree on every single tile while there's gaps between the trees, this is why. But yeah, that's the terrains tab. Probably won't be using it very much at all, but if you want to look up a terrain ID, then you can. I did notice as I was looking at that in the AI reference, there is, misspelled that there, there is a terrain parameter, but it looks like the list is incomplete. It only has the terrains that were available in the original AOC game, and not ones that were added in HD or DE. So I'll have to update this. But so it's going to take a look at the chat here. I'm not seeing a whole lot of questions. Not seeing a lot of questions specifically about the Advanced Genie Editor. So I'll give a few seconds for people to ask questions, but this kind of gives an overview of how you can look things up in the Advanced Genie Editor. I find that the user interface is pretty confusing when you first take a look at it, and so my goal was to give you, as AS scripters, enough bearings to feel confident in going through the user interface and looking things up. And hopefully this can come in handy if you're trying to look up a unit like the foxes, for example, that are new in the game, or hares or chickens, things like that. You can always find new unit IDs here in this list and attributes about all the various units. So hopefully that can help with AI scripting. But I don't want to take too long. Hopefully this overview of the Advanced Genie Editor is useful and can come in handy for whenever you're doing some AI scripting. This is looking at the raw data files. Well, not the raw data files, but it's showing the information from all the data files that is directly used by the game. So this utility is really powerful. And I think the devs themselves actually use this to update the game. And they keep this utility up to date with anytime they want to add new features. Like the friendly fire damage, I think is a new one that was added with I think it's Egyptian's gunpowder bonus that reduces friendly fire damage. So you can see that it's constantly being updated. But I think I'll end it here. I hope this is helpful, and I'll make sure that this is saved onto the channel so you can always come back to this tutorial whenever you need. I hope you all have a good day.